I've been imprisoned, each day a cycle of unending fear and despair. But today, I found my chance to escape. As I sprint through the forest, trying to flee from my captor, I hear the icy voice behind me. Chapter 33 Authors P. Oh, V Sky stared at him for a while as he glared at her before asking, What to do? What to do? He asked with humor as Sky breathed hard because of the impact. Don't you think a naughty girl like her need to be punished? To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. He asked, and the glaring Adam looked hatefully towards Sky. Yeah, why don't we make a meal out of this bitch? He says about to charge towards Sky when Carson comes in front of him and pushed at his chest. You'll not touch her. She's mine to deal with. Carson sternly said, and Adam complies without saying a single word, as he knew his dangerous master and how easily he loses his temper. Adam glared at Sky once more before smirking. She was going to be a hell load of pain for the stunt she had pulled. Besides, it wasn't like he ever listened to Carson. He'd deal with her later. As you say, to my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfading patience, enthusiasm. Adam said, looking at Carson, and leaves without another word. Sky finally catches her breath and tried to get up, but her dizzy head forces her back on the ground. You see, little human, I don't do well with disobedience. But since this is your first time, I'll be a little lenient with you. However, try that again, you might lose a finger or two. Clear, he said, and Sky nods. I thought we went through this. Answer me when I fucking talk to you. Carson screamed and Sky sobbed. Yes, I understand, Sky said, and Carson nods in approval, before going towards her and grabbing her up by her upper arm and in a swift and painful motion pulled her to her feet and taking her into his office, where she was supposed to be in the first place. There was a chair with straps set specifically for what he was about to do next. Sky looked at the chair and her eyes widened and she screamed. She struggled and tried to get her arm out of his grip, but it was useless. Please don't do this. Which didn't do much good because in the next few seconds she was securely strapped into the chair. Sky tried to get her hands out of the straps, but it didn't work. They were too tight, but if there was just a bit of lotion she could manage to slide through. Come on, darling, don't look so down, Carson said, and in a swift moment grabbed a chair so that he's sitting in front of her, face to face. Sky takes a deep breath as he examined her tear-stained face. For a moment he was mesmerized. She was beautiful, but he did need to teach her lesson for trying to run away. He cannot have her leaving. Now tell me, why did you try to run away? Carson asked. Sky didn't answer. She was shaking from fear. After a few minutes, Carson began to chuckle. Come on, darling. We went over this a few minutes ago, he said, and before Sky knows it, she felt a hard blow on her cheek. Sky whimpered from the pain and began to sob. Answer me when I fucking talk to you, he screamed, and Sky just sobbed louder. She sobbed, and in a swift moment, she felt unbearable pain in her hand causing her to scream. She looked down at her hand and saw a cut on it. She looked back at Carson and saw him licking a blood-stained knife. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. Why did you try to run away? Carson asked Sky, who was sobbing. Blood was dripping from the gash on her hand. I was scared, she stammered while taking deep breaths, and Carson looked at her. Well, why were you scared? He asked, and for once his voice seemed soft. It had been long since he had a company, especially a feminine one. Not to mention a human. I thought you were going to kill me, she said, quivering. I want revenge on Liam. I don't intend to kill you. Why? Sky asked softly but didn't get a reply. Carson takes a deep breath. He got up from the chair and turned his back to Sky. He knew what he was doing wasn't okay. He was never like this. This wasn't him, but he wanted to make Liam suffer, and the only way to do that was through her. The room was eerily quiet. The only sound was Sky's occasional sniffling. Carson looked at Sky's reflection in the glass in front of him and saw her head down. Her hair fell on either side of her head like a waterfall. Her body racked with silent sobs. Liam and I were close friends in childhood, the time when there wasn't bad blood between our kinds. Carson said, and Sky looked at him surprised. We would play together, train together. It was how everything was. But soon the order changed. Political views between both our kinds differed greatly. The difference grew and soon both the kinds began to despise each other. But even then Liam and I kept our friendship. Things got worse and soon there were raids and mobs of our kinds down each other's throats. His father was the right hand man of the werewolf royal, and under his order werewolves would attack our clan and clans would do the same. But Liam and I had to protect each other's families. Even though our families passionately hated each other. Carson said, and looked at Sky. I was the only one who kept that promise. After a month, the strongest clan of vampires attacked their pack and I saved his family. I fought against my own kind for them. And all of that for nothing. You know why? Because of exactly a month later. His father raided my clan, dragged my older brother out of the manor and made Liam kill him. He was young and he was forced, but at the end, it was his decision. If he wanted to stop, he could have. He was stronger than the average wolf. He could have defended us. But he chose to murder my brother. Carson said, and Sky looked at him with sorrow. She was shocked. She didn't know what to say. She didn't have a sibling, but she still couldn't imagine the pain Carson went through. I'm so sorry. I really am, Sky said with sorrow evident on her face, and Carson looked at her. She was breathtaking, kind and sweet. He had hit her minutes ago, yet here she was, strapped to a chair by him, sharing his sorrow. He walked towards her and kneeled down to her level. Liam will be too. He will be too, he said, and tucks a strand of Sky's hair behind her ear. Sky sees a tear fall from his eyes, but in a swift moment he, without a second look, rushes out of the office, leaving Sky there, strapped to the chair. She was shocked. Carson seemed so human, so vulnerable. It was a very different side of him, but she knew she needed to hear Liam's side of the story too. She had known him enough to know that he would never do something like this. He was a man of his words. Her back hurts and so did her wrists. Sky tried to get her hands out of the straps one more time, but it didn't work, causing her to sigh. Today was going to be a long night. She didn't know how long she would have to wait before anyone come and unstrap her, if anyone would come to unstrap her at all. But the possibilities were endless. Sky's right hand was going numb because of the deep gash. She tried shifting to a more comfortable position, but her back hurts. Suddenly she heard a noise outside her door and she went stiff as soon as the door opened to reveal Adam. I see your neck is still intact to your body, he said, glaring at her. Sky looked at him shakily. I am sorry for hurting you, Sky said, and he laughed. Sorry doesn't cut it, you bitch, he said, and locked the door while looking at her. By the way, love the color on your face, but honestly black and blue doesn't suit you much, he said, and Sky realized that he meant the bruise that Carson had given her from the blow on her cheek earlier. Adam's eyes traveled up and down, looking at her when they landed on her bloody hands. He looked at the blood-craving lie, before slowly walking to her, not removing his eyes from the dripping blood. Red does look good on you, he said, and kneeled down in front of her. Sky's breathing was hard and she was shaking. What are you doing? Sky asked, didn't get a reply as Adam brought his mouth to her right hand and licked the blood off. You taste amazing, he said in an eerie voice, and in cue, his eyes turned blood red. Sky looked at his face as the fangs come out and he licked his lips. You're pretty, you know that, he said, and slides the back of his hand down her cheek before landing on the pulse on her neck. Sky realized where this was going. Please, Dee, don't, Sky said, but he placed his hand on her mouth. No one will find out, he said, and Sky begins to hyperventilate just as Adam's mouth comes near her neck. His hands were firmly clasped around her neck while the other gently held her hair, so they were out of his way. Sky began sobbing just as his teeth grazed her skin and a scream escaped her mouth. As soon as the teeth pierced the flesh and began sucking on her blood, he was sucking her blood quickly, causing her excruciating pain. She held onto the armrest of the chair in a painfully tight grip because of the pain. While Adam moaned, she began to feel lightheaded as she heard pounding on the door, but Adam didn't even budge. Sky was seeing black spots when she heard a loud bang, and soon Adam was pulled off of her. She could hear screaming and a loud blood-curdling scream before someone gently started to pat her cheek. Hey, you there. A familiar voice asked. "See, Carson." Skye whispered and opened her eyes but regretted doing so, because the first thing they landed on was Adam's decapitated body. The head was far away and blackish gooey blood was surrounding the body, causing Skye's eyes to roll into ashes. Carson looked at her worried as her body went limp. She was pale and cold. After so many years he felt like this. The need to care for someone. "You're going to be okay, love," Carson said, and begins unstrapping her from the chair. He hadn't realized how tight the straps were until he saw the marks on her delicate skin. He quickly picked her up and took her out of the office and into her room, kicking Adam's body on the way. That idiot. He quickly set Skye on the bed and took a knife, cutting his palm so it was bleeding. He brought his bloody hand over the puncture wounds on her neck to seal them, then on her hands which he had cut earlier. He then brought his hand to her mouth, gently opening it with his other hand and pouring a few drops of blood into it just so she had a small amount of blood in her system. He looked at the bruise on her cheek and instantly felt sorry. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing enthusiasm." It would be gone by the time she wakes up, but he had vowed not to hurt her again. She was too innocent for that. He sat by her side for quite some time, before taking Skye's cell phone out of her pocket and taking a picture of her. He wasn't going to lay a finger on Skye, but he was still going to make Liam suffer. Without a second thought, he sent the picture to Liam. Chapter 30 for authors P.O.V. Skye's head was aching as she slowly opened her eyes and looked at the white ceiling. She felt cold even though there was a blanket on top of her. It didn't take her long to recognize the room as the one she had woken up earlier. She didn't remember how when she had gotten here. The last thing she remembered was Adam's headless body. It was a disgusting sight, making her want to puke all over. Everything felt fuzzy as Skye tried to move her hands so she could rub her eyes. But realization soon hit her that they were shackled to the bedpost. There was a blood drip attached to one of her hands, but the blood looked black and sluggish, making her wonder if that was blood at all. Maybe it was poison, but then she would have never woken up if that was the case. Skye wanted to scream for help, but her throat was dry. She needed to get out of there. She just needed to. But how? Even her movements were restrained. How could she pull off such a big stunt knowing the consequences of getting caught? However, one thing was for sure. She could not be a sitting duck and let them kill her. She wasn't going to let this happen. Skye turned her head towards the window and wasn't pleased to see the grey clouds covering the sun. She could use some warmth, and some daylight would have been a great guidance. Skye was brought back from her thoughts as soon as she heard footsteps. The footsteps began to get louder until they stopped right outside her room. Unlocking, Skye looked at the person and saw it was the familiar blonde-haired guy. "You know, love, I would have felt quite sorry for you if your mate wasn't a bastard," the guy said as he approached her, and Skye didn't reply even though she wanted to say that it wasn't her fault that fate paired her up with Liam. "Oh, I see you're ignoring me. But let me tell you that you might like my company." Silence, when paired with loneliness, can be quite nerve-wracking, he said, and Skye still didn't reply. The guy leaned while putting the key into locks that chained her hands to the bedpost. With a swish of his hand, the chains unlocked, and Skye sighed in relief as he removed them from her hands and threw them across the room while going to the stand which had the drip. He grabbed a hand to which the tube of the drip was attached. "This might hurt a bit," he said, and before Skye could say a word, he ripped the tube out of her hand, causing Skye to take in a sharp breath. That was painful. Skye looked at him as he grabbed the pund, and placed it on top of the puncture. Maybe making a friend could help her out of here. Perhaps he could be that friend. "Thank you," Skye said, and the guy looked at her. Finally decided to talk her. He said, not looking at her, as he grabbed a bunch of clothing and placed them on the bed. I don't like to talk much," Skye replied, not wanting to give him the wrong impression. "I noticed. Now get up and get dressed. Master will be here in a few minutes to have a word with you," the guy said, and Skye just nodded and looked at him as the guy began to make his way to the door. "Wait, what's your name?" Skye asked, and he smiled. "Curious, aren't we? Well, it's Alessandro. Love," he said, and left, locking the door, not waiting for a reply. Skye looked at the door. The shaky whispered, "Oh, okay." She decided to take her time as she got up. Her arms were painfully stiff as she moved them to her sides and tried to push herself up, but her hands wouldn't take her weight. This happened for a few moments until Skye finally got the strength and stood up, grabbing the clothes, which consisted of a pair of the black cardigan, a floral dress, and a pair of flats. The outfit looked newer from when she took Annabella shopping. She felt disgusted as she looked at the outfit again. There could be many reasons for which they could want her dolled up for. Hot tears began to burn Skye's eyes as she grabbed the stuff and made her way to the bathroom. She didn't have a choice. It was either this or some guy changing her into these clothes forcefully, and she wasn't going to let that happen. Skye quickly went to the bathroom and quickly stripped from her sticky, bloody clothes. She looked at herself in the mirror and was shocked at her reflection. She didn't have a single bruise or a cut, but she remembered the pain. She remembered the blood. Even her clothes were stained in blood. She shook her head and quickly hopped into the shower. She didn't want anyone walking in on her. She got cleaned up, taking her time, and in 15 minutes was dressed in the given clothes. Her hair was wet and she was shivering from cold because she had left the cardigan on the bed. As she folded the dirty clothes in the bathroom and placed them on the counter, she opened the door to the bathroom and stepped into the room, but screamed as soon as she saw Carson on the bed. "I was tempted to enter the bathroom. Took you quite some time," Carson said, and Skye didn't utter a word. But then she remembered how last time went when she didn't answer him. "I am sorry," she whispered, and Carson smirked. She learned her lesson then. Skye didn't dare to look at him. To say she was scared was an understatement. She was utterly petrified. He was bipolar, unpredictable, and a killer. "My blood, did you get icy? You've healed completely." So that's why she had no bruises. However, she couldn't reply because she didn't have any way to keep up the conversation. She began to shiver again as cold air nipped at her skin from the open window. She could feel eyes on her and sneaked a peek at Carson, who had gotten up and making his way towards her. "Do you like the dress?" "I chose it myself," he said, and Skye nodded. "Why, yes. It's very Thank you," she whispered and continued to look down. She was going to get sick if she didn't grab that cardigan soon. "You're very welcome," Carson said, and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Why are you shaking so much?" he asked, and Skye could feel his touch burning her. Why was he being so creepy and touchy all of a sudden? "I am feeling really cold. Do you mind if she whispered, pointing towards the cardigan, and Carson let go of her. "To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm." "Love," he said, and Skye quickly staggered to it and draped it on. She buttoned the cardigan to the top so that she didn't reveal much skin, while Carson just looked at her with an unreadable expression. She quickly slipped on the flats when Carson broke the silence. "Come here," he said, and Skye took a deep breath. She didn't want to be near him, but she had no choice. She slowly walked towards Carson and stood a feet away from him. When she didn't move anymore, Carson grabbed her by the waist and pulled her towards him. He grabbed her cardigan and started unbuttoning it, showing the dress underneath. Luckily, he didn't take it off. "You look better like that," he said, and Skye didn't say anything as he continued to stare at her. Skye was getting scared by the minute. She had a bad feeling in her stomach. A very bad feeling. "Come on," he said somewhat gently, and grabbed her hand, while his other hand unlocked the door. Skye wanted to get her hand out of his hold, but she didn't dare. They walked down the stairs and turned many hallways. Skye took no interest in her surrounding as she was completely lost. She couldn't get back to the room, even if she ventured these walls even 100 times. They were just that much confusing. Soon they stopped in a huge Victorian-style dining room, with a chandelier and all the medieval details. The dining table was a 20-seaters, which made Skye wonder why there would be need of so many chairs when there wasn't anyone here. The house, or whatever this place is, was huge, but there weren't any people she had seen beside Alessandro, Adam, and Carson. Thinking that 20 people might live there seemed acceptable. But then where were they? Skye was brought out of her thoughts when Carson pulled her hand and settled her on the chair beside the head of the table, where he sat minutes later. You seem quite distracted. Anything I need to know about?" Carson asked as Sky shook her head and looked down. "No," she whispered. Carson hummed while looking at her. "You know, Sky, you're very beautiful," he said, and Sky tilted her head just enough to notice the predatory look in his eyes. She felt a chill run down her spine. Lucky she was saved when a loud knock was heard at the door. Carson had closed before taking his seat. "To my agent extraordinaire, Marianne Noban, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm," Carson said in a stern voice, and an old lady came in reading a tray much bigger than herself. Her back was bent forward and her skin was wrinkly. She was a bony figure, but what stood out most was her eyes. She had huge vertical gashes on both of her eyes down to her cheeks, which made her completely blind. But the lady's actions told otherwise. Her steps so strange as if she knew where to walk, just like a normal person. Sky felt extremely creeped out by the lady. "My lord," the lady said in an eerie voice, making the hairs on the back of Sky's neck stand up, as she bowed towards Carson and then grabbed the plates that were covered with metal domes like in posh restaurants. She was starving and food would be a comfort right now, but there no assurance that the food wouldn't be poisoned or drugged. She removed the domes off of the plates to reveal steaming hot food. The only difference between both of their food was that her steak was well cooked and his was raw, even with a bit of blood. "Leave," Carson said, and the lady turned her head towards Sky and bowed towards her, causing Sky to shake. Even then Sky looked at her. "Thank you," she whispered to her softly, and the lady turned towards her and grabbed her hand, kissing the top of it. "I said leave," Carson said loudly. His voice boomed and the lady quickly staggered out of the dining room, closing the door shut behind her. Carson took a deep breath and grabbed his fork and knife, expertly slicing a piece of bloody and raw meat before putting it in his mouth and slowly chewing it. Sky lost her appetite as she heard him eat the disgusting thing. She wanted to puke her guts out. Sky didn't as much as even touched her food and continued to look at her lap. "Sky, darling, look at me," Carson said, but Sky didn't move. Carson reached and grabbed her chin, tilting it towards him, and Sky noticed he looked paler than before and scarier too. "You haven't touched your food, love. Is anything the matter?" Carson asked, and Sky shook her head. "I'm not hungry," she whispered, and Carson sighed. "That couldn't possibly be it. You haven't eaten for some time now. I don't want you starving yourself," Carson said, but when Sky still didn't grab her fork, he wasn't too happy about it. He abruptly got up from his seat and came behind Sky's chair, so that his face was in the crook of her neck and one of his hands was holding both of her wrists tightly. His other hand grabbed the fork and stabbed a piece of potato, bringing it to her mouth. "Come on, open your mouth. If you're not going to eat your food yourself, I have no problem feeding you," Carson said, and Sky struggled in his grip. "Please," Sky began to say, but Carson cuts her off. "You know, darling, I can do this all day, but I do get bored quite easily. There are many other ways for me to open your mouth." He whispered it as her ears, and she felt his sharp fangs brush her neck while he planted a soft kiss, and Sky's eyes filled with tears. "Please, I'll eat the food myself," Sky said, and Carson let go of her completely. Sky took a deep breath of relief and grabbed the fork slowly, chewing on the food while Carson stared at the girl with a longing look as he went back to his seat. He didn't want to hurt her. He didn't even want the beautiful girl he had suddenly taken a strong liking to be scared of him. He wanted her to soften to him, and then maybe she could realize he was better than Liam. She just might stay with him. What could be a better torture to Liam than that? Chapter 35. Author's P. The month went by and no one was even close to finding Sky. Liam had sent an entire party to search the ancestor house of Carson, but they had returned without any luck, claiming that there was nothing but wild herbs and trees on the location Liam had given. He was getting more at the edge by the passing minute. He hadn't received a single message, picture or note about Sky but the one that day, in which she was bloody and bruised. He felt like dying, and the only option now was to overtake each search party and visit every single place assigned himself, praying that the pack members had made an error. He hoped that he just might be able to find Sky before Christmas, which was a month away. Meanwhile, Sky was getting scared and scared every day by Carson's behavior. He had become too touchy. He would kiss her neck and cheek every time he would come to her room, bring her expensive clothes and force her to be near his gaze every second. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Sky thought he was being friendly, but the looks in his eyes told her otherwise. She missed Liam. She missed him so much. He had practically done everything to prevent this fate for her. She was stupid for hating him and acting like a child in the first place. He respected her and was overprotective for her own good. He was gentle and never forced her into anything. He never forced his love on her even when he had the power and the strength to do that. He did everything for her comfort. But Carson was a complete creep who was getting creepier and creepier. Day by day, she looked out the window. The sun was setting, which meant Carson would be coming for her soon. It's been like this for the past month. Sky was already bathed and ready, wearing the clothes that Carson had bought her. A pair of dark jeans and a blush pink V-neck sweater, which Sky would pull back every once in a while so it didn't reveal the black lace of her bra. She didn't wear the pumps as she sat on the bed with her feet up and didn't want to dirty the sheets. Just as the sun completely went down and stars began to illuminate the sky, she heard the expected sound of the door unlocking. She took in a sharp breath and looked at the door. Not moving. Carson came in smiling at her and closed the door behind him. Sky looked at the closed door, then back at Carson. "Good evening, darling. How are you today?" Carson asked, and Sky looked at him as he approached her and sat on the bed beside her. "I'm fine," she said, but refused to look at Carson as a thought swirled in her mind. He wouldn't mind if she voices it. Would he? Sky thought, but took her chances, taking a deep breath. "Carson," Sky whispered and looked at Carson, who was looking at her encouragingly. He was mildly shocked but mostly happy that she was talking to him. "Yes, love." Carson encouraged her, and Sky got a bit giddy as she nervously sighed. I was just wondering, when can I go back home? It's been a month and I miss my family and my uncle must be worried. Enough." Carson yelled, cutting Sky off, and stands up abruptly. He was extremely angry. He didn't want her to leave. He would never let her go. He menacingly looked at her, and she takes a deep breath as he grabbed her upper arm and pulled her to her feet in a painful grip. "You are never leaving," Carson said to a struggling Sky, who wanted him to lose his grip on her arm. Please, let go," she pleads, and silent tears roll down her cheeks as she struggled. Carson shakes her and, in a fit of rage, slapped her. She falls on the bed from the force of the slap and began sobbing from the pain. Carson then punches the wall beside him in anger, and Sky sobbed louder. "Why the hell do you want to leave? I'm giving you everything here. Much more than Liam or your stupid family could ever give you, and you still want to leave. How dare you? Fucking look at me." He screamed and grabbed the lamp that was on the small table and threw it across the room, causing Sky to scream and clutch her head as she wept loudly. "I am sorry. Please stop. I'm so sorry," Sky said painfully. She was shaking from fear. She didn't dare move as she sobbed into the mattress, her hair covering her face as Carson angrily paced the room trying to calm himself down, quietly murmuring curse words. Sky sobbed in frustration. She wanted to go home. That's all she wanted. Her uncle, her Jacob, her family. She wanted them back. Carson looked at Sky after 15 minutes. He had managed to calm down, but the girl on the bed was petrified, choking on her own tears. He makes his way to the bed and sits beside her, and Sky curls up into a small ball so that she doesn't come in contact with him. "Love, I'm sorry for getting angry at you," Carson said, and Sky didn't reply as she tried to calm down, but nothing worked. "Love, please look at me," Carson said, but Sky didn't reply and tried to curl up more. She heard Carson sigh, and suddenly he grabbed her ankle and pulled her towards him. Sky screamed and tried to kick him, but he got on top of her, pinning her legs with his while he intertwined his fingers with hers, so she couldn't push him off. Hey, shush. Everything's fine. Don't cry, love." Carson tried to calm her down, but that makes Sky cry even more. Please. I am sorry. Just get her off," Sky said, sobbing. She was choking on her tears and breathing was becoming an effort for her. Carson shook his head as he looked at the girl underneath him. He leaned down so their noses were touching. Hey, you have nothing to be sorry about. I got angry. I'm sorry. I hurt you, he said and kissed her bruised cheek. It's just that. I can't imagine you leaving. It's been so long since I had company, especially such a lighting one as yours. You're everything I ever imagined of. You're kind, thoughtful, and beautiful. You're everything. And the thought of you leaving just made me angry. Beyond doesn't deserve you. No one could ever be perfect for you, but I want to try. Carson said, and it was like Sky couldn't breathe, and before she could even say anything, Carson beat her to it. I'm in love with you, darling. Have been for quite some time and always will be. Carson said, looking at her passionately. His eyes had grown dark as he looked at her petrified face. She was so innocent, so gorgeous. Her chest rapidly moved up and down and Carson could see the black lace bra underneath, making him go crazy for her. Sky was extremely shocked but wasn't out of her mind as she began to struggle underneath him. Gee, get off, she said as tears began to roll down her cheeks and Carson grazes his lips along her cheekbones and her neck. His eyes were dark with lust and he was losing control with every minute. I want you to come down. Take deep breaths. Come on, Carson said and nuzzles his face into her neck and Sky closed her eyes, trying to calm down, but it didn't work. She ends up sobbing again when she felt him lick her neck. Then kiss it. Please, Al, let me go. I don't want why you, Sky said sobbing and twisting her hands in awkward angles trying to get him off. Her sentence got Carson's attention and he looked at her with lust. You'll want me too, he said if he was 1% positive, and before anything else could happen, he crashed his lips on top of the Sky's. Sky screamed loudly and wept in disgust. She didn't kiss back and kept her lips in a thin line as Carson attacked them roughly. He let go of one of her hands, only to pin it with other as his free hands pulled at her sweater to reveal her black lacy bra. Carson removed his mouth from hers and trailed kisses down her chest. Please stop. Please, Sky said sobbing, but Carson ignored her as his teeth grazed the cloth of her bra. I won't hurt you, love, Carson mumbled as his hand goes underneath her sweater, running circles on Sky's stomach, causing her to give an ear-piercing scream. Suddenly the door burst open and Carson was pulled off her. Sky was wailing loudly as she curled into a ball and began to hyperventilate, black spots invading her visions. Breathing had gotten extremely difficult. She knew she was going to pass out soon and Carson would continue his assault. She could hear Carson arguing with a familiar voice. The voice she recognized as Alessandro's. How dare you interfere? The voice slowly faded away as Sky began to shake violently. What's happening to her? Alessandro said as his eyes fell on the young girl, whose body was violently shaking on the bed. Carson finally looked at her and his eyes widened at her state. She was curled up in a ball, clutching her head tightly. He went by her side and tried to grab her hand, but she screamed loudly, causing Carson to jump back from the unexpected reaction. Sky, he asked gently, and Sky's eyes rolled into her head. The last thing she thought was, where was Liam? Chapter 36. Authors P. O.V. Liam walked through packs and packs of trees as he looked for the manor, and the only thing he could think of was that something wasn't right. He had gone and searched everywhere for Sky, and the only place that was now left was Valentine's Manor. He remembered the manor as if it was just yesterday when he was there. It was old, vintage and beautiful. It had all the things he admired with a friend he loved, but feuds bonded with blood always got the best of everything. Nothing beautiful ever lived and nothing enthusiastic ever survived. This is the world. This is life. He remembered every single detail leading to that hidden manor, but yet something wasn't quite right. Not that anything ever was nowadays, since Sky was taken, but he felt lost. In order to get through the manor was a kilometer walk through the foreign to the clearing, where the unmistakable manor was situated. But he had been walking for some time now and the forest didn't seem to thin out. He was sure it should be thin by now. Hell, he should be at the manor by now. He heard a creak and looked down to see a twig crushed underneath his feet. He looked at the twig in frustration and rubbed his face thoroughly with his hands. The twig was crushed into two. He continued to walk for another 20 minutes. Where the hell is that bloody goddamn manor? Liam muttered. He was alone and barely paying enough attention to his surrounding, while the rest of his pack did the perimeter check. He heard the familiar sound of a twig breaking underneath his weight. He fleeting looked down at the crushed twig, but all of a sudden he was interested in it. The twig was the same he had stepped on minutes ago, with the only difference that the twig which was earlier into was now broke into 4 parts. He grabbed the pieces of the twig with curiosity and examined them carefully. They were the same. What if he was in some sort of loop? He wasn't unheard of it. Yet it was complicated and only be cast on by warlocks, which were practically the endangered race of the current era. Not to mention they were quite expensive providers. Ian turned around and looked at the forest. Before he got an idea and took off the hoodie he was wearing, he tied it to one of the trees securely and kept his eyes open. If this was a loop, then there was some hope that maybe he was getting closer to Sky. Because otherwise, Carson would never use magic to estray him. Liam continued to walk north for quite some time, again keeping a close eye on everything. For some time he had lost hope when suddenly he saw the familiar piece of clothing on the tree, leaving him shocked. He was right. It was a loop. But the problem now was to break the loop. He took out his cell phone from his back pocket and dialed Blake's number. To my agent extraordinaire, Madeleine Nilben. Heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Blake answered on the first ring. Get me a warlock. Chapter 37 offers P. O.V. Sky wanted to die as she tightly clutched her knees to her chest, barely breathing as she shook violently. She hadn't slept at all since yesterday. She hadn't eaten anything the entire day. Not that anything had been offered, but she felt sick to her stomach. She felt like a wreck. Her eyes were blotchy and red from all the tears she had shed. She felt disgusted, and no matter how many times she thought of it, she could never change the fact that Carson had touched her. Not only that, but forced himself upon her, with the intention of doing much more than that. And the worst part of it was that if Alessandro hadn't come, he would have gone through with it and she wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. Sky looked outside the window. It was somewhere between 4 and 5, indicating someone was going to come into the room soon to give her fresh clothes. She was always expected to be clean and ready by 6 for dinner with Carson, which had been a habitual thing for the past days, most probably to make her look like an eye candy. On cue, she heard the doorknob wiggle and she closed her eyes tightly as more tears began to well up. She knew it wasn't Carson, but she didn't want to face anyone. Not even Alessandro. She heard the door open and someone walked in. Oh, I thought you would be resting, love. How long you've been awake? Alessandro asked, being polite for once. Even he started feeling sympathy for her. Sky ignored him and didn't answer as she kept her face hidden between her knees. Tears were rolling down her cheeks. Lo? You want something to eat? I didn't check up on you because I thought you were sleeping, he said, with worry, hoping to get about none. After a few minutes, he sighed and placed the fresh batch of clothes on the bed beside her. You know what to do, he said softly, and was about to leave when he heard a whisper. I don't want to, Sky said as more tears fell from her eyes and Alessandro sighed. I'm really sorry, love, he said, and for once Sky did sense the sorrow in his voice as he left the room. Locking it, she peeked at the clothes and saw blood-red lace. More tears filled Sky's eyes as she roughly wiped them away and reached for the lacy clothes, which were placed on the bed neatly folded, and threw them across the room as if it was something vile. She curled into a ball and began to sob. She didn't know what to do. She wasn't only hopeless but completely alone with a deranged vampire. She wept for God knows how long, and when her eyes travelled outside, it was dark and fear began to set in. Carson was going to come soon. Her heartbeat began to quicken as she tightly closed her eyes and heard footsteps approaching the door. Oh God, this wasn't going to end well. Sky grabbed the first thing she saw, which just happened to be a lamp, and clutched it close to her chest. She turned her back to the door and closed her eyes tightly as she heard the doorknob wiggle and soon the creak of the door opening. Oh my, is everything all right, love? Carson asked as he looked around the room. Then his eyes landed on the red dress threw on the ground, and he began to fill with rage. He went and picked it up. With every step Sky's heart throbbed. He placed the dress on the bed and then looked at Sky. "Get dressed," he said sternly, looking at her body, which didn't even move. He began to take long strides to her, and Sky took a deep breath. She was going to need it for what she was going to do next. Just when Carson was close enough, with all the force in her, Sky flung the lamp at him, hitting it hard on his face, causing it to smash. It was as everything was in slow motion. She got up as a loud wail of pain rose in the air and quickly ran out of the room. She could hear screaming, but nothing mattered as she ran, navigating herself with the help of the map she had made in her mind when she almost escaped the first day she was brought here. But thanks to now Dedham, that was never made possible. But now, this was the moment. Sky breathed heavily as she looked at the door she was approaching. The door to her freedom, and before she knew it, she was outside running towards the forest. It was dark when Liam spotted the familiar figure walking towards him, dragging a man by his collar. The man looked in his late 20s or early 30s, dressed in a white button-down shirt and black jeans. His hair was honey brown and his eyes piercing blue. He seemed nothing out of ordinary, but then Liam saw the mark on his left hand, the mark of the arrow, and finally realized this man was the key. This man was the warlock. "Nice job, Blake," Liam said, looking at the man. "Why do you need him anyway?" Blake asked as the man looked at Liam smugly. Liam ignored Blake's question and turned to the man. "I presume you know me?" Liam asked, and the man raised his eyebrows cockeyed. "How can I not? But the question is, Mr. Big Bad Alpha, why do you need my assistance?" The guy said. "I need you to remove the loop." Liam said, "Down to business. How do you know it is a loop?" "You werewolves always mistake things quite easily," the guy said, and Liam smirked. Liam kicked a stone from the ground and with his werewolf strength, threw its trait in the air, watching it accelerate into nothingness. "How is that going to prove anything?" the guy said, and Liam raised his hand to silence him. He turned around and caught the same stone flying towards him, proudly showing it to the warlock. "Now cut the questions. Can you do it or not?" Liam asked. "Yeah, I can do it." Nodding. "What will you need?" "I'll gather my supplies." "You get me a vampire." "What do you need a vampire for?" "I'm not an idiot, I know this is a vampire territory." Reuben and David walked, clutching their knives tightly. "I can't believe Liam is making us do this," David said, clutching the syringe containing a bright green liquid, which was meant to sedate the vampire. "Oh, suck it up," Reuben said, making sure the syringe was securely placed in his pocket. "The sooner we do this, the sooner Sky gets home. If we're lucky, we might even get her before the sun rises tomorrow," Reuben added. "That's a major if, because not to burst your bubble, anything. We're here to kidnap a vampire from the largest coven of vampires in the world. I don't think we'll live to see daylight, to be honest with you," David said dramatically, and Reuben rolled his eyes when suddenly they spotted a figure. David quickly grabbed Reuben's hand and ducked behind a trash can, bringing his finger to his mouth, indicating him to shut up. They examined their prey carefully. He was alone. Looked 20. He was talking on the phone and more like barking at someone. "You fucking idiot. I gave you €5 to get me blood hosts, not blood bags. I asked you to do one thing and you can't even do that right, you brainless fucktard," he bellowed, and Reuben looked at David. "Remember, don't shift or he will pick up our scent," Reuben whispered, and David looked at him baffled. "Then how the hell are we going to get close enough to him?" David questioned frantically. "Just follow my lead," Reuben said, looking at the angry vampire who ended the call, and his back was to them, making sure the guy hadn't seen him coming from behind the dumpster. "I see you need blood hosts," Reuben asked, and the man turned around looking at him. "And who might you be, boy?" he asked, and Reuben shrugged and moved to stand in front of the man, angling him so that his back was towards the dumpster. "Whom I don't matter, but help you with your problem," Reuben said professionally, while his other hand motioned for David to sneak behind the man, making sure the leech didn't see it. "How are you going to get me blood hosts?" the vampire asked, and David began to sneak up. "Does it really matter?" I'll get you what you want. What type of host do you need? Reuben asked just as David was about to inject the syringe into him. The man got a phone call and he turned around to receive his cell phone from his back pocket. His eyes landed on David and he looked at him with rage. What the hell? He exclaimed and was about to attack when Reuben quickly retrieved the syringe from his pocket and roughly injected it into the pale vampire's neck. The vampire fell to the ground limp. David and Reuben looked around, breathing hard, making sure no one had seen them. Their eyes landed on each other and with that gave each other a high five before tying and gagging the vampire. They were lucky their car was near. With that, they threw the vampire in the boot and drove to their destination. Chapter 38. Arthur's P. Skye wanted to be as quiet as a mouse, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't quiet her sobs or heavy breathing as she ran through the forest, barely avoiding the trees. She was shivering from the December weather, and the sweater she was clad in since the past day was now a bit torn because of her contact with the bushes and God knows what else. She felt as if her body was freezing, but she felt good. She finally felt alive, and if she played her cards right, no one would be able to stop her from the rightful freedom she deserved. The jeans she was wearing ripped at her knees as she fell to the ground, but she got up in record time and continued to run forward. Skye, love, you know there's no running. She heard Carson scream, but to her luck, his voice was distant, but a part of her knew he was toying with her. Come on, you can do this, Skye whispered to herself as she urged herself to run faster. She ran straight ahead, ignoring the searing pain in her legs. She ran until she could run no more. Her teeth chattered as she finally looked behind her, and to her happiness, no one was there. Not even the leaves moved. Skye fell to the ground, breathing heavily. She was sweating, but it felt like the sweat was turning into ice. She looked at her hands in the moonlight. They were pale with sharp little cuts from her venture. She leaned by the tree, breathing hard. She was going to continue, but there was no doubt she couldn't do this much longer. She knew nothing about this forest, and now helplessness began to set in. Carson would hurt her when he found her. Fear set in and Skye quickly began to get up, but her feet refused to support her. There has to be another way, Skye murmured as she grabbed the tree for support and got up before Carson found her. And aren't you? Her nightmare became true. Where do you think you're going? An icy voice said behind her, making her blood run cold. You know, it's really pathetic that you thought you had a chance. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. But to be honest, you look really cute when you struggle. Make me watch you even more. Skye was about to run when Carson grabbed her roughly by the elbow. Quite an adventurer, he said, and slammed her into the tree. Skye looked at his pale face that had dried blood on its side. She then looked at his lips that were pulled back to a sneer. I told you something the very first day, didn't I? Carson questioned in a deathly voice. Didn't I? He shouted, and Skye began to shake from fear. She didn't say anything, and Carson punched the trees. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. I just want to go home, Skye replied, and Carson became angrier. To that bastard werewolf. Listen here and listen good. You're mine. Carson screamed, and Skye tried to push him away, but Carson grabbed her hands. Don't ever try to push me away, he said, and brought her hands to his mouth, kissing them. Let me go home. I can't take this anymore, Skye said. Carson just glared at her, then let go of her hands, only to clutch her waist tightly, bringing her so close to him that Skye turned her face so their face wouldn't touch. You are. To my agent extraordinaire, Mythical Nilben, heartfelt thanks for your unfailing patience, enthusiasm. Skye, I'm never going to let you go. And just to make sure you don't leave, we're going to have a little talk when we go back home. One which Alessandro won't even disturb, Carson menacingly said, and Skye looked at him disgustedly. Carson grabbed her hand in a strong grip, and Skye screamed. She wasn't going to go anywhere without a fight. Let me go, she screamed, and Carson manhandled her. Shut up, he screamed, and Skye tried to kick him away, but in a swift moment, he grabbed her and threw her over his shoulder. She still tried to kick him, and Carson grabbed her legs. Try that again and I'll rip them off, Carson threatened. Let me go. I'll leave and never come back. I'll go back to Australia. I'm never letting you go. Darling. Without a warning, Carson began running super speed through the forest and did half the time. They were now walking to her captivity. The house. Carson opened the door and entered the house. The house was eerily quiet and Sky realized that Alessandra wasn't home. Carson walked up a flight of stairs and entered the dreaded room. It was the same, with the shattered pieces of lamp still on the floor. Carson went straight to the bed and threw her on top of it. Sky tried to stagger away, but he grabbed both her legs and dragged her back towards him as he got on top of her, straddling her waist. Please, Sky began to say, but Carson shushed her as he examined her. Her eyes were blotchy and there was a cut on her right cheek. He then looked at her sweater and it was a bit torn, showing her lacy bra. His eyes darkened and he began playing with the hem of her sweater. Now, beautiful, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I'm going to go outside and you'll go outside and you're going to change in that pretty red dress. And if I find you not in that dress exactly in 5 minutes, I'm going to change you myself, love. He said calmly as if he was talking to a child, and Sky nodded. We went through this, darling. Answer me when I fucking talk to you, he said in a sickly sweet voice. He leaned down and kissed both of her cheeks, licking the cut. Oh, okay, Sky answered, and Carson smiled at her before getting off her. He looked at her once more before getting off of her and leaving the room. Sky quickly staggered up and grabbed the dress. It didn't take her long to notice the matching garments that were folded inside the crimson dress. Sky grabbed them with hatred and made her way to the bathroom. She showered for 3 minutes and changed her clothes in record time. She examined herself in the mirror, feeling extremely uncomfortable. The dress hugged her body and she looked very beautiful, but also something she would never ever think of wearing like. Her eyes were still blotchy and red from the tears and she looked tired and extremely pale. She wasn't doing any justice to the dress she was wearing. You look very beautiful. She heard a voice behind her and she turned around to come face to face with Carson. He looked at her from head to toe and then back up. That wasn't too hard, Carson said as approached her, and for once Sky stood her ground. There was no place to run. Her eyes traveled to the clock in the hallway. It was 2 a.m. No wonder she felt tired. His eyes were dark and face flushed as he grabbed her waist and pulled her closer to him. He nuzzled his face in the crook of her neck and took in her scent. Tears filled Sky's eyes as she took in a shaky breath. He suddenly grabbed her hand and began roughly dragging her out of the room. Where are you taking me? Sky asked, but Carson didn't reply as he continued to drag her through the unfamiliar set of hallways. Sky carefully watched the new set of hallways getting darker and darker, and in seconds they were standing outside a room. Carson opened the room and put Sky in roughly. Sky's eyes scanned her surrounding quickly. The room had huge sliding windows that looked more like walls, with thick black curtains. There were a bed and a dresser and a huge portrait consisting of a picture of a boy with a man and a woman, most probably his parents. Sky looked around the room and in seconds realized it was Carson's bedroom. She whipped around to look at Carson locking the door and taking off his shirt. She was about to say something when suddenly she was tackled to the bed. Chapter 39 Authors P. Oh. Liam paced around looking at his watch, waiting for Reuben to bring the bloody vampire, while the warlock set candles around some sort of ashes. They're here, Blake said as he spotted Reuben carrying the vampire over his shoulder. Give the vampire to me, the warlock said, and Reuben threw the vampire by his feet and massaged his neck. Damn, he's heavy, Reuben said, and Blake came to him and patted his shoulder. Liam made his way to the warlock and watched as he took out a knife and grabbed the vampire's arm, slitting its wrist open. He placed the vampire's hand over the ashes so the blood fell on them. As soon as the blood fell, smoke began to rise from the ashes. The warlock began chanting some sort of understandable words and slowly began to rise up. His hands stretched out. But what drew Liam's attention was seen beyond. It was as if some sort of frost was expanding on an invisible wall in front of them. The louder the warlock chanted, the more frost appeared until cracks began to exhibit on it. You could even hear the cracks as they expanded on the entire wall until there was a loud sound and the wall broke into pieces. Liam watched the pieces as they disappeared before even touching the ground. The warlock got up and looked drained as he clapped his hands together. "My job here is done," he said, and with that turned to leave, not waiting for an answer. Liam looked ahead and saw the familiar pathway he had been looking for. "Come on, we aren't that far anymore," he said, and began to walk straight through, avoiding the trees. He had been walking for only about 15 minutes when suddenly he picked up the familiar scent of vanilla. Reuben and Blake picked it up too. "Come on," Liam began to say when a loud scream pierced their ears. Skye screamed loudly as her back touched the bed, and a shirtless Carson fell on top of her, pinning her hands on the bed along the way. "No, get off," Skye said, fighting desperately, but Carson had pinned her that easily. "Darling," he moaned as he nuzzled his face into her neck and began kissing it up and down extremely delicately. "Please don't do this. Please," Skye sobbed as she tried to shove him off her. "I love you so much," he mumbled as he completely ignored her and trailed kisses down her neck to her chest. He let go of her hands and grabbed her waist, pulling her towards him more as his finger made their way to the back of the dress and straight to the zip. Skye screamed loudly as she felt Carson's ice-cold finger sliding on her back. "Stop. Stop," she screamed. She was extremely desperate, but in fit to stop him she began screaming. "You're so beautiful, darling," Carson said as his lips made their way to her ear, as he began nibbling on her earlobe and his hands began caressing her legs. Suddenly a loud bang was heard. Even Carson noticed it, who was busy undressing her. His eyes turned red and he glared at the door before giving Skye a warning look and got off of her. She could hear things crashing and breaking downstairs, when suddenly Skye heard a howl and then a very familiar voice, making her cry with joy. "Skye," Liam said, and Skye got off the bed ready to run towards the door, but Carson grabbed her hands. "Where do you think you're going?" Carson said icily as he grabbed her and threw her back on the bed. He was frustrated when he heard footsteps approaching the room. He wasn't even prepared, and where the hell was Alessandro? Carson didn't have the time to react as the door opened and Liam barged in looking predatory. He looked around the room and his eyes landed on Skye, then on Carson. "You fucking bastard," Liam said as he lunged at Carson, who turned to smoke and disappeared, repairing beside Skye, who screamed when he grabbed her and hauled her to her feet. "You have some guts to come to my territory and attack me," Carson said to Liam as he kept a firm grip on Skye. While she struggled, "Let her go," Liam snarled at him as he looked at Skye. "I don't think I can," Carson said as he leaned down and kissed her cheek, causing her to sob in disgust. It's been a long time since Liam had seen her, his beautiful mate, but letting her get violated like that made his blood boil. "Carson, get away from her," Liam said through gritted teeth as Carson looked at him straight in the eyes. "Come and make me," Carson said, and threw Skye to the side, causing her hip to hit the bedside, making her scream in pain as she fell down, clutching her hip. Taking deep breaths, Liam lunged at Carson just as Reuben, David, and Blake entered the room. Carson reappeared at the windowsill this time and everyone looked at him. "This is just the beginning, Liam. Next time you see me, I'll bring you one hell of a fight, and when I do, your mate will be all mine. Watch out, Liam," Carson said and jumped out of the window, turning into smoke before his feet touched the ground. Liam glared at the window, then turned to Skye. Not wasting a second, he went and fell by her side, bringing her in for a hug. "Reuben, David, get rid of the body. Blake, get the car ready," Liam said, referring to the decapitated body of Alessandro, his voice raspy, and everyone left without another question. Liam gently grabbed Skye's face in both of his hands and looked at her, staring straight into her tear-filled eyes. "I'm so sorry," Liam said, and Skye shook her head. No, I should have trusted you. You were protecting me and I tested you at every moment," Skye said, hugging Liam, and he took in her scent. "I promise I'd explain you everything after you've rested and comfortable at the pack house," Liam said, and Skye nodded, not letting him go. Liam scooped her up and got up and then began walking, taking her away from the monstrous cage.